middle school. We're recording this, so we invite your questions, and depending upon so put your questions either in the chat or raise your hand if and somebody will either read your question, or if you feel comfortable just saying it on video or with the video off, either way is fine. We certainly really want to hear your questions and have a chance to respond to them. We all encounter children differently from our particular vantage points, whether it's from being just a parent, being a teacher who works in the school, as kind of a therapist, a pediatrician, and the like. And so I think it's particularly kind of valuable that we have slightly different kind of perspectives on the challenges of being a middle school child. So I'm going to make sort of very brief kind of introduction. Lydia Paddock is a clinical psych intern who's with us at Northampton Area Pediatrics this year. Jen Penza is the behavioral health coordinator, our go-to person at NAP. For Leah Kentler is a therapist in town and has had extensive experience working in middle schools. Kathy Cassell is a beloved figure in kind of Northampton as a school psychologist of many years. Carrie McLaughlin is a certified prevention counselor through the city of Northampton, if I've got that right. And of course, Amanda Dickinson, one of our beloved pediatricians here at NAP. So I'm going to just make a few kind of comments and then we'll begin our kind of discussion. You know, when it comes to middle school, most of us do have a middle school story. It's a time that really stands out in our memory. You know, what's been termed at times the reminiscent bump, indicating that we have some of our most vivid memories from this time period. And so we think about our children kind of entering this phase. I think it's important for us to just give brief consideration just to our own perspective in our own middle school years. You know, that mixture, as always with parents, with what we would like them to avoid, not having our middle school experience, but at the same time also having some of the good stuff that hopefully did occur. This is a phase of parenting in which parental competence takes a nosedive. Surveys have suggested that feelings of parental competence go way down during this time period. Surveys also suggest that the most unhappy moms in the universe are not those with sleepless infants or restless toddlers, but the moms that have a middle school child. So, you know, there's a potential time that's really kind of evocative for us as parents. And just consider some of the titles of the books about this, you know, time period. How to Love a Porcupine. Get Out of My Life, but first drive me and Cheryl to the mall. And then the book by Judith Warner. And then they stopped talking to me. So, you know, it's the age of embarrassment and it's also the age of opportunity. And so much is going on. You know, of course, we wonder about the residual effects of the pandemic for, you know, our children who were 6, 7, 8 during that time period. But so much is going on. Many children by the age of 11 have a cell phone. A lot of people have watched porn one way or the other by the time they're 12. Puberty is starting earlier and lasting longer. You know, there is the kind of dramatic reorganization of the brain, leading to kind of complex, abstract kind of thinking. And then the other hand, being able to think more complexly makes the world a more anxious and uncertain place and may drive some of the kind of drive towards conformity that we see so often in this age. They're more sensitive to rewards, and it's the age of smart kids often doing kind of stupid things. It is an age of vulnerability. The average age for mental health disorders starting, 14. More specifically, things like social phobia, average age of onset is 13. Trichotillomania, 12. Skin picking after an incident of acne, 14. And of course, depression and anxiety, we know, are kind of been on the rise. And it's the age of opportunity. These are individuals with amazing learning capacities, and it's often a positive joy to see how they assimilate and metabolize information and new interests. It is the age of kind of a search for identity, and it's an age which is different from ours in terms of the gender expansiveness that is part of this, age group, so different from certainly when I was growing up, which was so different from the audience that here's growing up. It's an age where they're addicted to popularity, and relational aggression is often at its peak. In all of this, there's also an age in which they are exquisitely sensitive to our approval and our judgment. And so I hope our panelists can help us discern how we can kind of maintain kind of a viable conversation with our children and not get them kind of turned off and going into seclusion. So I'd like to kind of just, pose a question to our panelists in terms of what are some of the issues that bring children in to kind of see you. And I guess I'd like to start with you, Kathy. What are some of the issues that are bringing children into your office at JFK?
Yep. So I'll just everybody, hi, I'm a school psychologist at JFK Middle School. My work at JFK Middle School is primarily with students who have special education needs, although I also run some other programs in the building. And I would say the kids that I come into contact with most often are kids that really have difficulty with executive function, kids that have problems regulating their impulses and maintaining attention and organizing all their stuff. And what I will say to you is that we are ridiculously cruel in the way that we schedule school for children at this age when we know their executive function skills are not super well developed. We give them 7 periods a day that they are having to change and make all of those transitions. And now we have a waterfall schedule in the afternoon so that their afternoons aren't predictable either. So we're taking young brains that are sort of trying to figure out how to manage school, and we make it a little tricky for them. With a lot of transitions throughout the day. So I would say the kids that I come into contact most often are kids that are they've been in a self-contained classroom throughout elementary school with one teacher who can sort of help them manage their day, manage transitions, organize themselves. And now here they are in middle school, and they have more is expected of them to just sort of manage their time, their bodies, their mouths, and all their stuff. So Ted, I would say I feel like that's something that I see as, a very common challenge for children in middle school.
So, these children may have been able to kind of manage their executive function or attentional challenge in the kind of more contained classroom, but hitting junior high, then their resources get really kind of taxed and it really begins to show up.
Yeah, I would say that it's, yeah, I would say that is the most common struggle that I see for students in middle school.
Okay. Leah, what do you notice about kind of the kids who kind of come into your, I mean, you've worked both in the school and, you know, now in a kind of a private practice. What do you notice about this age group? And
I would say the when I both worked in schools and also in private practice, the number one drive for young people is about social challenges. And I think that that really speaks to both the complexity that comes with middle school with social interactions, and also the just their own internal emotional intensity that they're feeling. So I think kids, young people come to me because of that emotional intensity, as well as parents are bringing kids to me because they're noticing the emotional intensity and feeling it's new to them. And I think sometimes it can feel scary. Many times it's really developmentally normal in this stage, and I like to tell young people that all the time, that your brain is doing this massive growth right now, and your body is changing in so many ways, and it's going to take a while to organize itself out, and the highs can be part of that and the lows can be part of it. And so much of what I'm doing is normalizing that process, but I think it's the main reason people also come to see me.
great. Have you do you have any kind of suggestions in terms of what kind of really helps in terms of kind of communicating with this age group? Because
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a lot of things that I'm sure many people here would also have done. But I I mean, the number one thing is that that many times interests are changing at this period of life too. So maybe a child was into a certain way of playing with toys or into a certain friends, and those can really change. And so I think it's helpful to just as a clinician, but also as parents, to just take interest in the changes that you see in your child, learn about those, learn about what they're interested in doing and playing and watching, and just have a level of curiosity. And I always say that in general of any sort of thing that you're trying to understand or you're struggling with as a parent, the more that we can go into it with a sense of curiosity, the less reactivity that a child is going to provide. Because their defenses won't go up. And that's hard as a parent, especially when it's issues that we might have our own feelings about and our own opinions about. But I do feel that this age is really asking to be heard, and finding ways that that is possible with still maintaining boundaries and values that work for your family.
so, you know, Lydia, you've worked in with middle school and kind of children, and just wondered what you noticed about what brings the children kind of, you know, into your office.
Yeah, I think I often found kind of what Lee was saying of initially, I think a lot of things kids were coming in for is some issues in school. So sometimes there were some instances of struggling socially. And then coming to my office, and I did a more long form therapy historically. So it also would come to light that maybe there were some big family transitions going on, moving schools, like custody changes. Um, yeah, and a huge thing I found is that kids would come in and talk a lot about like the drama that's going on in school and social dynamics. And really, there was just so much there, and how important to be able to process and navigate those relationships at school. So I'm just really, I don't know, what Leah was saying was really echoing for me. Some other things that would come up, you know, sometimes parents would notice some decrease in interest in activities and less engagement with peers. So they would come in just a little worried about their kiddo. Sometimes that would show up. Also, I had some kiddos who were having some sleep problems, some like thoughts coming up before bed. So making plans for that, some worry thoughts. And it's also a time there's some existential thoughts going on about like life. Like it's just a really intense period of time. So a bunch of things.
So that's so, as I said, we all kind of encounter this age group kind of differently. So we've heard from kind of two kind of therapists. I'd love for us to kind of hear from one of NAP's pediatricians, Dr. Amanda Dickinson, in terms of, Amanda, what are the questions? I guess one way to put it is, what are the questions that you get presented to by kind of children in this age group? And I wonder if you could kind of just give us some perspective about, you encounter them kind of differently than we do, constrained by kind of brief visits, but you have this advantage of such a wide kind of exposure to all sorts of children. And wonder what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I see them for their checkups and then also for their mental health visits. But I think the thing that, if I had to generalize, which it's difficult because I think based on gender identity and family lifestyle and age, I think everything is variable. But I'd say as a common thread, we're seeing that children at this age in particular, which is really a hardship for families, is that they're going through a natural developmental stage where they're pulling away from family groups and trying to go more into peer groups for advice and like learning and life stuff. And that is a huge shift for most parents who have always been the ones providing that support and that stability for children. And children naturally want to be in their peer groups now and not be asking their parents for the same advice and support that they've been used to providing. And so a lot of the kids are asking me if the things that they've heard are correct, or if, there are things that are safe and are not safe that they don't want to talk to their parents about. And of course, I always encourage them to talk to their parents if they're in the room by themselves. But some of that shift can feel hurtful to parents when they're not hearing everything about what's going on with their kid. But it's also a natural process of parting with the family group and going into social groups, which kids need to do in order to be successful adults as we move and transition from middle school to high school to out of the house. And I think when parents try to grab hold of their children so tightly, you get a lot of that like discordant feeling where now they're holding on so tight that these kids are pushing further and further away. And so if I could get parents to hear anything, that like they still love you in middle school, they're still there, but it's super normal for them to not always tell you everything or come to you for everything. And they may go to Kathy or Leah or me or their best friend and ask, and then come to you second, or come to you when they've had a bad outcome because they tried what their friend said and it didn't go over so well. And when you hear that happened and you're hurt and angry, just remember like to try to check some of those feelings of your own and support your kid in that moment, and you will come out of that a hell of a lot better than if you come down on them about making a bad decision when their executive functioning and their frontal lobe still kind of stinks. So I think that's where I see some of the discordant relationships, where the kids just want to figure it out and they want to do some of it on their own. And unfortunately, as parents, sometimes we have to let them. And that sucks. I have a I almost said 7-year-old, sorry. I have a 7th grader, and he's experimenting with some things, and I don't love all of them. I'm not gonna lie, but I have to live with it because it's his choice about who he's becoming as a human. And I am not here to control who he becomes as a human. I'm here to try to make him a good human. But that can be really difficult, I think. And that's where sometimes a pediatrician or a counselor can come in really handy when you feel like there's some gaps in some of that transactional information coming back and forth. But like maintaining the trust with your child that they can come to you even when they've messed up is really important, because it's going to happen.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I just want to hop onto that and just also say, kind of in a reassuring way, one of the words this week that our 7th graders are learning is influence. And I watched a couple of lessons this week in a few classes where the question was, who's been your greatest influence, or who influences you the most? And I can tell you that 90% of the kids said my mom or my dad. So they are still absolutely depending on that tight relationship with parents and caring about the influence that their parents have on them. So just know, moms and dads, these kids, they're still appreciating you and recognizing the majorly important role that you play.
Kathy, I just wanted to say, I see that tremendously, that kids are still deeply noticing parents, and they do hear you. They just don't necessarily show it many times. And so it's so often that pull away. What I notice is parents pull away as well. And then you have two beings in the system, the family system, that are not talking. And so as parents, finding out how to keep being in, even if that your child is not showing that they're interested, they're not giving you the feedback that they're listening. Because from someone who talks to kids all the time, I know they are. I'm sure of it. And yeah, and I just really, Amanda, what you said, I think resonated with that too, that one thing that's helpful about having relationships with other adults in children's lives is that it is a time where they go to other people, and it's a real honor in my job, and I am sure everyone here, to be that person that knows, that can be an adult but in a different way as a parent, but can still provide accurate information, thoughtful guidance in a way that they're not always ready to listen to with their parents, and get the pushback. And I think that sense of mistakes are going to happen. That was another thing that I really heard from what you're saying, Amanda, is that this is a time of great of mistakes. That's what adolescence is. If you think about, I bet all of us on this panel, everyone here did things when they were younger that they can think about and go, oh, wow, I'm really glad that didn't end up another way. I have a lot of those stories. And as parents, we many times want to not have our children have those experiences, but those experiences also build us up to who we are. They give us a sense of like, oh, I'm not going to do that again. Or, okay, that wasn't that bad. And so finding ways to let kids do things and let kids mess up it's great to happen now before the stakes get bigger.
The iceberg analogy is relevant for this age group, that what's above the waterline isn't necessarily reflective of what's below the waterline. And I drove my daughter to kind of middle school kind of every day, and she never said a word to me the entire, 2 years that I did that. And yet when she, as an adult, said that actually one of the things she appreciated most about me was when I would call her after school and just say, how was your day? And she told me absolutely nothing, but the fact that I just simply had her in mind was quite meaningful to her. So, Kara, I wonder if we could have your thoughts.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself right when you were about to ask. So I don't see young people specifically about substance use. As a public health practitioner, I'm thinking about systems and what to put in place around best practices and advice for caregivers in schools and So I'm not coming from the angle of working specifically around substance addiction with students, although I do run a high school group and do a lot of more school-wide change work. So with that said, I was putting together a resource list around substance use prevention, which I can put in the chat. And one of the first things is exactly what people have been saying, is that like your influence really matters, and often people don't think it does. And I think many of us have probably experienced this. I do have a sixth grader, full transparency, that just started JFK. Is that we'll like hear our kids saying what we've told them to other kids, even though when we're talking to them, they'll kind of like roll their eyes or not want to hear it or argue. But then I'll hear her saying certain things to other children. So I think that's true for all of us, is that we often forget how much they are absorbing from us, and that our influence is like it's not just a guess. This is research based too. And I'll just put this link in, but there's just some really good quotes I pulled in. Just you just having a good relationship with your child is the best thing you can do as a parent. And so as a parent of a pre-adolescent, is like working on your relationship, and working on some parenting skills of like how do you active listen, and like people were saying, and be curious. And I even struggle with this myself, of when my daughter tells me something I'm not excited about, to like correct or like kind of go in, and like I'm really working hard to like just be curious and listen. She came home with her Chromebook the other day for the first time, and I was like, oh boy, here we go, and she wanted to show it to me, and I didn't want to look at it. I was so annoyed, and I was like, I have to just be present. She wants to show it to me. This is an invitation. So taking all the invitations you can get, and not going in with the advice right first thing, which is definitely something I struggle with personally, because as a public health professional, I know what all the information is, and I have to stop myself from just saying it. Um, I guess other things to know is that there's a lot of myths out there around substance use. As you start to get older, you'll still hear a lot of myths that are in the zeitgeist, or, that we grew up with and are true. Like um, it's a rite of passage. Rates of substance use are dramatically declining from when we were young people, and it's not inevitable that young people will use. There's more and more evidence, including with cannabis, that it's really not good for humans. And the research, I'm not anti-cannabis at all for adults. I'm just saying the research is really new of what's happening to adult brains and adolescent brains with cannabis. So in general, just don't assume that your kids will use. And that when we are modeling of how we talk about alcohol and substances and what we do in front of our kids is really important. When do we use alcohol as a stress reliever? Do we say, oh, I just want to get home and have a glass of wine? Like, keep it to yourself around your tweens. Don't say those things out loud. And maybe like check yourself of being like, maybe I am like thinking about these things, and give yourself some other strategies of modeling around stress and substance use. Um, and then another myth is that Europeans have less addiction and they have lower age of drinking, and that's just not true. There's much higher rates of binge drinking in Europe. There's myths like that out there that I would not lean on if you hear people say those things. Just there's a lot of great research out there now, and I'm going to give you some of it to check out. And I'm absolutely available to talk to anybody about these things.
Amanda, do you find that there are, Kara was just talking about kind of myths with regard to kind of, drug use. Do you find that there are some certain topics that you come back to again and again that are kind of misconceptions, either on the part from a health standpoint, from either parents or from your young patients? You're kind of muted still.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that I find the most difficult is the censoring of information a little bit. I mean, everything obviously has to be age appropriate depending on your kids, both stated and developmental age, you know, because everybody's a little different. But I think kids do seek information, the information seek. And so I think hiding things from them or trying to keep things from them is not always so helpful. Because if they don't find the answers they're looking for from you, they're going to information seek from people that don't have the answers that you want them to entrust with their little brains. And I find that like finding out what they're actually asking is helpful. So if like, so the topic of sex, for example, it's going to come up, it's middle school, how much they know is questionable depending on the kid, or where they're at in that. But they're interested. And so if you are feeling sort of shame or embarrassment and you go into that conversation with some kind of shame or embarrassment, you know, you're kind of teaching inadvertently that something is shameful, and then they may not come to you the next time, or they may seek information elsewhere. And if you can remain in that like lovely developmentally appropriate sphere for like substance use, like Kara was saying, or sex or consent or those types of topics, I think it's a really lovely time for you to impart not just information, but part of your value system on your children, you know, like what you expect for them, what you hope for them, what you want them to really take home and understand, and then also allow them to like impart some of their information. And so I feel like we do like we're so used to that toddler mentality where we have to like safety proof everything, like get all the corners taken care of and put all the dangerous things away. And that's true in this case too, but also imparting, you know, some information that maybe is age appropriate to our kids that are just curious, like responsibly curious about topics that are starting to enter their sphere, either in media, social media, in the hallways. You know, what does this word mean? What does this slang mean? What does it mean to be in a relationship? How do you treat your partner? Like all they're learning all of that stuff now, and trying to like sort of not have those conversations because of internal bias, I find is really difficult in my perspective, because then, you know, it makes the conversation later a little bit more challenging, than if that relationship was already sort of started in the middle school era and we're not now starting the conversation in 10th grade or 11th grade, you know. And so I guess what I would love if parents would take away is just to be open and maybe really listen to what your kids are asking or like knowledge seeking about. And it may be something super innocuous, like nail polish or Taylor Swift. But it may be sex or marijuana or smoking or something that they heard on the bus that they didn't really understand about race or gender, especially with the political climate that we're living under. And I think that is, I would look at that as a opportunity to impart some of your world's knowledge and your value system on your child and not allow that opportunity to pass and let them go in and ask the other sixth graders what they think of racial justice in America, right? That would not be ideal. And I'm just using that as an example, but that could be for any topic. And I think a lot of that then causes some anxiety and fear. And then they end up in Kathy's office or Leah's office. And maybe we could have done something to prevent some of those like really scary big fears and behaviors earlier. But I mean, like I said, every child is a little bit different. And so if you have a specific like question or concern about your baby, I would bring it up to your either mental health or your medical professional so we can kind of talk through it together and maybe the best way to approach something.
And with what you said, Amanda, which resonated with me was kids are going to look for answers. That's just, I think, an inherent part of being human. And so we either as parents can choose to some degree give information And that could be through conversations or through books. My mom never talked to me about sex. That was my pediatrician, but she gave me really good books. And so I learned information that was accurate. But she didn't, for her own reasons, have those conversations. It didn't feel comfortable. So I also think we all have limitations as parents of what we feel comfortable with. But children are going to ask questions, or they're going to be searching out answers. And I see this all the time. I'm in the world of substance use. Lots of young people believe that marijuana, because it's a natural occurring plant, that it's totally fine. That is a myth. And so they're going to find information in different ways. You as parents can find ways to make sure that it is both accurate and fits in your values, and what your hopes are. And that doesn't always have to be talking, because that doesn't always, it's, if it's not comfortable, or finding someone who your kids are close to that they can have those conversations with. So I just want to tag with that.
Leah, if I could add on to what you're saying, a strategy I use is one of our close family friends, the kid is best friends with my kid and is comfortable with me asking questions. So if I cleared it with her parents that I have permission to talk about sex ed, substances with their kid, and I'll talk when that child is over on purpose, because they'll engage with me in a conversation. It's much easier for that child to hear it, and it's easier for my kid to hear it, and then my kid will sometimes engage too. It's like a really lovely strategy for like, we're like, oh, here's a moment where I can like give this information. Or I'll be like, did they do the puberty talk yet? I'm like, oh, did you know this? Or I wish when I was a kid, I do that a lot too. I'll say, I wish I knew when I was a kid that big tobacco just like now owns big cannabis, and I'll explain what that is. And so then I'll explain the strategies of getting new clientele, and it's about making money. And then when those things come up, and the question will appear about like, why do people vape? And then I'll say, well, remember how we talked about it's a way for people to make money. And because my father died of COPD, we can make it real and talk about how people don't know, and that then they become addicted, and we talk about addiction and the developing brain specifically.
I also find, from what you're saying, it's super true. If you talk to your kids just as a practical measure, in the car, I find is the best time to have a conversation with them, because you're all like facing the same direction, like a pack, and none of that eye to eye, like aggressive eye contact is happening. And so if there's some embarrassment or fear around a certain conversation and you bring it up in the car and everybody's just kind of facing forward, having a nice conversation, it feels, at least in my experience with kids that are a little bit anxious or nervous to talk about something, it feels a little bit more open that way when you're just sort of stuck there anyway and no one's staring at you. You can be like fiddling out, looking out the window, or like just chit chatting, and everybody's kind of doing the same thing. And so if you're really nervous about bringing up a conversation with your kid or vice versa, like on the way to soccer practice or on the way home or something might be a good chance to do that. Like think of a pack mentality where like all the dogs are facing the same direction. It's a little less intimidating, I think, to do that in that location and in that way for children and adults to just have really hard conversations when there's no like eyes on you like that. Anyway, the harsh
Well,
kitchen light isn't always the best place to have that conversation, but
Well,
just a thought.
they're monitoring our reaction, and but they're not they're monitoring, observing. Their children generally are great observers, but they're lousy interpreters. And so they don't always they're going to read into, oh, you're angry at me, and whether you're just, just because you scratch your eyebrow or something like that.
Ted, there is a
Um,
question in the chat. I don't know if you want to.
Yes, actually, that's great, John. I was just going to ask you, if we kind of pause and just see if the audience would like to kind of have a question, or in chat, or can you read the question from the chat? Or
Sure. It says, how specifically can we support our kiddo, your kiddo, when they come to us as Plan B? Praise their efforts for seeking out the info that they needed elsewhere. Ask them what they found out. Ask them to identify which bit didn't go right. Ask them for ideas of what's next. What language specifically can we use to keep the channels open?
When I read that question, Lori, I was like, those are great questions. Like, good job. And I think it's not as much the language as how we're responding in that moment. And so I'm a researcher, can you tell? But you can ask great, I mean, those questions are great, but it's also how are you responding? And one thing that I tell parents often is if you notice that you're starting to feel that you're getting flooded with your own emotions, it's okay to model, I want to get back to you on this. Like I really am listening to what you're saying and I need some time to think about it. So you don't always need to respond, and how you model that sense of, ooh, I'm noticing I'm getting like worked up in this moment. And I'm not listening to you as well. I want to return to this. I'm really glad you came to me. So I think that the questions are important, but it's more how our affect is, how our behavior is when we receive it, that is going to help keep those channels open.
I like to call that like you're attuning to your child, like is more important often than the content, is that like that connection. And I know that like when I have had that strain in relationship with my child, I just like prioritize getting back in attunement before I worried about what our conversations were. And then and sometimes that's not an easy thing, you know, and that it's not always clear how to do it. You have to know yourself and know your kid. And sometimes the only advice is your internal advice is to follow like your heart. And there's skills. There's books too, resources.
I think also remember, like, people tend, and humans in general tend to respond better to positive reinforcement. So like, instead of freaking out and coming down on them hard, I've had this happen where my son came to me and said, I know you told me not to do this. I did it anyway and I hurt myself or whatever it is. And I usually start with, I'm so glad you told me. And I'm so grateful that you felt comfortable telling me, because you're always allowed to change your mind and you're allowed to make mistakes. I am a little upset with you right now, and that's okay. And we can talk about this in a minute, but I just need to step away for a second. Or if I'm not upset and I'm like, I knew that was going to happen, I'll sometimes just say, thank you for telling me. I'm so grateful you felt comfortable coming to me. How do you think we should handle this? And just let him like kind of decide, like, how bad was this? Like, what did I do that could have been better? Like, could we have done this a different way that would have worked better? What do you think? Or like, what if we had tried this? Do you think we should try that next time? And, let them come up with some ideas or brainstorm some ideas. And that's where you can be a little helpful too. Like, when I was young, or like yesterday when I did this, where they don't feel so alone. But you can say, like, I've made that mistake too, buddy. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Let's think about ways that we can maybe prevent that from hurting your feelings next time. And, letting them be just part of the conversation about not necessarily fixing it, because some things we don't want to fix for them. And some things we do, obviously, but like there are moments, but letting them kind of come up with some what they think are feasible ideas, and then letting them know which ones you think may be a good idea, but not necessarily shooting down that their ideas are bad, but like, what do you think about this? Could we try this? And if you're feeling everybody said, if you're feeling anxious or angry, just give yourself a minute to feel those feelings, but don't hide them necessarily from your children. You want them to see that you also feel anger or anxiety or fear or whatever. I've told them before, you scared me. I love you so much. And when I think about you getting hurt, it scares mommy. And that's why sometimes I get really nervous when you walk on things you're not supposed to walk on or whatever it is. And then, sitting down together and brainstorming better choices for like the next time this situation arises so that we can maybe keep ourselves safe and framing it in a more positive light than you screwed up and I'm angry.
Many times I tell parents if there's something big that happened, they found out something that their child did, that they're angry, or it is to wait 24 hours before they talk to their child, because as parents, we're going to be calmer, our brains are going to be functioning better, and also kids get time to think about what happened. And sometimes immediately discussing it is actually not going to allow for a helpful conversation. And so it's okay to not address things immediately. And I think also just with the brain development at this stage, they just need some time to think through it. So waiting, putting a pause, and then saying, we got to talk about this, everyone's going to be calmer.
Great. Just before we move on, are there any sort of additional kind of questions from the audience that, either put in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask them? But, okay. I don't know about the audience, but I would certainly like some help with the issue of how to kind of respond to all of the stuff that's going on with their peers at this time. The shifting friendships, the increase, the problems with relational kind of aggression of various types, and and how to kind of respond to things like first crushes and then the heartbreak that comes when they break up 2 weeks later, and the like. And I wonder, whether I don't know, Kathy, if you have any thoughts about that, or you would like to give a stab at that, or
Yeah. I guess I would say you can expect that all of those things are going to happen. I guess that would be the first thing that I would say. Parents, it's going to happen. Your kids are going to have broken hearts, and they're going to have friends that are not friends, and they're going to have social conflict that's going to feel really hard and uncomfortable. It's going to happen. I would just say expect it. It's going to happen, and this is how your kids are going to learn how to manage relationships as they grow. I guess the other thing that I want to kind of say is that at JFK, and whatever middle school your child goes to, if they're not at JFK, there are a lot of grown-ups in the building that have a lot of experience with this. There are a lot of adults in our schools that have been working in middle schools for a really long time and love talking to your kids. So I guess I also just want to make a plug for the fact that we have lots of grown-ups in schools that love to listen to kids and love to also help them with these kind of friendship struggles that come up. At our school, every grade has a guidance counselor that is always available to your student. We have 3 other additional adjustment counselors, social workers in our building. We have 2 assistant principals that are really good at connecting with students. And honestly, we have lots of teachers in the building who are, I often see kids in teachers' rooms during their prep periods or during their lunch breaks, sort of telling them about today's heartbreak. So I do want to reassure people that in the building where your kid is, there are lots of grown-ups that are also available to talk to kids about kind of the social ups and downs that definitely are going to happen and be a part of their middle school journey. It's expected, it's part of what happens, and it is how kids learn about themselves and about others. I guess that's what I would say, Ted. Just expect it.
If I can add to that as well, and then I see that Julia asked for a book about sex, and I do have some that I would recommend. But before, I just want to say is that when I was thinking about this talk tonight, I was equating the time of entering into middle school is similar to when the child becomes a toddler and all of a sudden they want to do everything on their own. And there's this real frustration as parents that we have of being like, oh, but it's going to be a mess and you don't know what you're doing. You don't actually know how to feed yourself. You don't know how to wipe your butt. And that there's this learning curve that needs to happen in that toddlerhood that is, it actually takes a lot of time. And that there is a real learning curve that is happening in elementary school. And one of those is with social dynamics, that they are really developing new skills that they are really bad at. And one thing I noticed when I worked in schools is so often parents would call the school, and many times rightfully so, but they would call the school and say, this happened and this person sent this text to my child, and this person is not being kind to my child. And I'm not saying to not advocate for your children, but also that struggle is part of this time period, and figuring out that identity of who one is as an individual and who they are within the group is part of this period. And so not everything needs to be figured out. And the work that they're doing at this time is figuring out who they are in this new, with this new friendship dynamic. And it's okay that they struggle. It's okay that they feel frustrated, that is actually can be, it's okay that they can be upset, that's a developmental growth, to be able to feel that and to move on and to figure out what to do with it. And so when those disruptions happen socially, to again lean into what happened. What do you want to do? How is this in, what do you do with this information now that you know this? And lean in with that curiosity versus trying to solve. And just in terms of a couple books I can add in about sex. One is I do want to give a plug to the OWL program, which is they give very accurate sexual education. It's through the Unitarian Church, and it's not a denominational program, but it's a sexual education program. There's some book, it's called Sex. It's a graphic novel, but actually young people really love it. This book is gay. That's about having sex or sexual relationships with different bodies. And then a couple other books that I just gave this to a parent. I will, there's two other books that I can also put in the chat as well that I've come to, for sixth graders. There's this book called Sex is a Funny Word. I think it's good for the late elementary, early middle school. Sex is by the same author. A lot of it too is about consent as well, of trying to understand when things feel good and then they don't feel good, because that is part of this period as well. So I can put those in the chat box.
Lydia or Kara, would you have anything to kind of, add it or to this kind of comment about kind of peer relations? And
Feel free to jump in, Lydia. I'm a New Yorker by birth, and we talk over one another, so feel free to jump right in. Yeah, I was just going to echo on Leia's suggestion that sex is a funny word. I haven't given my kid sex yet because she's really sensitive and she would be overwhelmed with that because it has more graphic information, like more information about sex. So she's almost ready for it. But I think she's just on that cusp. But I did give her sex is a funny word a while ago, and she was like, what is that? You know, like pointing at things in the book, and it was like great conversation starter. So I definitely think that's like a strong one. And High Five Books has a great section around sex and puberty for those with you children with uteruses. There's a Renee Taylor has a great book about puberty that I really like. That's also at High Five. And there's some good books, just parenting books, not specifically around sex. I put one on the handout that I shared in the chat. How to Talk When Kids Won't Listen is a fabulous book for building skills. Yes, Kathy, there's many versions of it over the last 30 years, and this one's really updated. I just absolutely love it. I've been talking about starting a book group around that for skill building. If people are interested, reach out to me. Maybe it's something we can partner on. And I saw Embrace Race website just came out with things are specifically around good race conversations, and I'm a big fan of them. I'll think about it more. Lydia, what about you?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about the teens I was working with and social navigation of relationships in that time period. I feel like thing I'm really thinking about is just like how hard it is. You're going through so many emotions, and also it's so uncool to have these big emotions and needs publicly. And so I felt in a lot of my work, I was like modeling how to be, and I would kind of make fun of myself, like, oh, I'm sensitive. Like that would hurt my feelings if someone said that, and just kind of modeling what it can be like to really like sit with these feelings and these experiences. And yeah, a lot of the tool I would use is just like being okay with being a little lame. Like I feel like that's how I would handle, having these teens come and talk to me about some really complicated social dynamics. Um, yeah, and I think especially with the internet and social media, it creates another layer of a place where kids can be quite hurtful to each other. So, yeah, I think really modeling, like letting what your teens tell you, like has an emotional impact, and that's okay, and sitting with them. Yeah, that's what I think about.
You know, we've talked about kind of the importance of just in some books about kind of sex education. I think it's also, what sometimes gets neglected are the kind of emotional or relational aspects of kind of, early kind of relationships. Lisa Phillips has written a kind of a nice book called First Love about kind of the first crushes and the like. And, she points out that this is the time where children are discovering their romantic identity. And these first kind of relationships are really important as a kind of a first draft in terms of what it's like to have a kind of romantic kind of identity, and how important it is to provide children, your children with an openness to have some discussion about what this is kind of like. You know, you know, in kind of surveys of kind of young adults, over 70% of this one survey said that they wish they had had more kind of input from their parents about just having relationships and what that meant in general. So that just would be an additional kind of element that I think is important to kind of keep in mind. I have a podcast on iTunes, and I have an interview with Lisa Phillips on my podcast, Your Anxious Child 5-Minute Solutions, in case you're interested. So, okay. So
Hey, can
let's
I add to that what you were just saying?
yeah.
Last year I did a little after school health ed class at Leeds Elementary, and we did a lot of work on consent and practicing consent, and like really like helping your child understand what consent is. the Children's Advocacy Center in the region has some really great materials to do child's abuse prevention. And so like familiarizing yourself with like the elements of consent and practicing. And one of the things that I really learned is that sometimes when I'm in teaching it, sometimes when I'm like standing up for myself, I expect a positive response back. And what I really helped this, and I found that's what the children were doing too. They were like trying to convince me that it was okay for them to say no to something, so we were like practicing saying, I don't like you touching my shoulder or pulling my hair, and then waiting for the person to say like, yes, okay, you don't like that. And most of the time that's not going to be the response. And like, it was such a aha moment for me and such a gift I felt that I could give to this group of kids. And my own kid was like, you can say no and mean it and pause and then change the subject. And so I just like, that was like, I don't know. I just wish that for every person and child is to like learn what practice consent, and then not expect to get a positive response once you give it.
Right. Kathy, you deal a lot with kind of children who have challenges with executive functioning. And do you have any kind of thought? The issue of consent may be particularly challenging for somebody who has trouble with kind of their brakes in terms of kind of hitting the stop button. And do you have any kind of thoughts about how we can kind of help that particular cluster of kids who, they're impulsive, they have trouble with their brakes, they, maybe it's ADHD or maybe it's something else, but any kind of thoughts?
I think one of the most helpful things that we can do to kids that have trouble with breaks is to prep them for situations ahead of time. I think about moms going into the grocery store with little kids and telling them what the rules are going to be before they go into the grocery store. About you can't be grabbing candy or you won't get any or whatever. And I feel like that kind of sort of prep for situations that parents can give to kids still works when their kids are big. So that I feel like parents can sort of prep kids before they go to a school dance or before they go to a party and talk about sort of what are the rules for going there? What is expected behavior? I think it's really okay to be reminding kids about rules and about our expectations for them right before they go into a situation where we know that that might be tricky. And I think having that conversation ahead of time, like, so that's like living right in the front of their brain, right before they go into that situation. That's one thing that I'm thinking of right now, Ted.
Right. No, that's helpful. That's helpful. So just want to kind of pause for a second just to kind of check whether there are any kind of questions or not. And if they're not, around the age of 11 is where a lot of children get smartphones. And I would love to hear from our panelists about what their thoughts are about phones and kind of social media and kind of how to kind of have a balanced approach, about this, about this topic. As we know, it's from the book Anxious Generation, there's one school of thought that's saying that this is, since smartphones became, kind of popular in 2017, that's when anxiety and depression really began to kind of peak, with children. And then we have to kind of remember what was said in Good Housekeeping in 1925, where, a person wrote, "The three inventions of the telephone, the automobile, and moving pictures have made a totally new environment for our young children and have created a real chasm between the generations." So we also want to keep potentially that perspective in mind as well.
I'm happy to jump in here on this
Yeah,
one.
please.
I have no conflictual feelings in my thoughts about this at all. I love the idea of wait till 8. wait till 8th. I wish that that is something that just became the norm, that kids didn't have access to the internet in their fingers until 8th grade or after. I really don't think that kids should have access to the internet in their bedroom with the door closed at night. I think if kids have phones, their parents should have them at night when I cannot, yeah, I just feel
So
like
Kathy, why are you so, okay, why are you so convinced? I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but why are you so convinced? Why are you so vehement about this?
yeah, I'm vehement about it because it all spills over into school, right? We see it. Kids walk into school every day with all kinds of difficulties that have occurred on phones, right? I feel like the adults in our school buildings spend a lot of time helping kids process and manage hurtful things, scary things, inappropriate things that happen with phones when they're not in our school building. So I just feel like yeah, I really feel that I feel like it'd be fine for kids to have, you know, a phone that doesn't have the internet on it before they're in 8th grade. But I think putting that device with all of the, yeah, I just don't think kids have the skills to manage all that information 24/7 on their own at these young ages. I just think it's a really bad idea. And, you know, we work really hard for kids not to have phones at school. I will tell you the number one, you know, people that are texting kids at school most often are their parents. Yeah, I just really wish the kids didn't have phones at school, and I really wish the kids did not have access to phones at night. You know, I meet a lot of kids that don't sleep very well, and when I ask them why they're not sleeping very well, they will admit they're on their phone or they're on some other kind of device until, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning. And then they're exhausted when they come to school. So yeah, my big push is just if your kids are gonna have a phone, yeah, don't let them have it at night when you think they're in their room sleeping, because they're not.
Amanda, is there a chance you have any thoughts about this topic?
I have lots of thoughts. I completely agree. My son does not have a phone. I am in the wait till 8th grade club. Absolutely. I'd wait longer if it felt like it wasn't socially isolating for him. I see tons of kids that have screens in their rooms that don't sleep. I see kids that have gotten access to like imagery that they can't understand or fully know where to put in their brain, and then have bad outcomes like with nightmares or night terrors or whatever. Then they share that stuff with other kids because they're information sharers. I feel like kids have a hard I when I say this, I mean this also for adults at this point. um there's a very difficult process of vetting online what information is true and what images are true and what's real and what's AI and what's accurate. And like in this age group, we're already struggling with information seeking and trying to figure out who we are. And some of this stuff, this information coming in so rapidly, where we can't tell the truth from fiction and we're not able to vet out information, it just muddies the waters. Not to mention when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, I could leave my bullies at school or leave the people that didn't like me at school. And now that is no longer a possibility if you have kids that are constantly online. And whatever they're watching, they're taking in, and it's maybe imagery that is something that's gonna like change their brain chemistry, for lack of a better way of saying that, that they're gonna not be able to unsee something or unlearn something that's really either hurtful or scary. We don't live in a world where I feel like unfettered access to the internet is safe anymore, even for grown-ups. The news cycle comes out rapidly. School shootings are a big stressor. And even though they are unlikely theoretically to happen in our communities, our kids are watching. And news cycles come out about all kinds of stuff that our kids don't know where to hang that hook. And if they're intaking that information without your ability to impart some knowledge or some context or some value system to hang that on, they're literally making things up into their own head to make that fit. And in some situations, that will be scarier than reality, or it will be completely false. And so I just, I feel Kathy so much on this. I would prefer kids don't have unfettered access to the internet in any way. And it freaks me the heck out that I can't control that for my own son. And I know I can't, but I'm going to do my best. And I hope that all parents are doing their best. And when kids do have access to screens, my advice for those parents is generally to have the screen facing a public area of the house, like a living room or a kitchen. No unfettered access in bedrooms. And I do not like TVs or phones in rooms with kids overnight. I want stuff plugged in the kitchen or plugged in my bedroom where I know I can see that his phone is on my counter. He doesn't have one yet, but it will be plugged in my bedroom where I can see that he's not using it while I'm awake at night. But the imagery and the story, it's the news cycle we live in. I mean, I know they're going to have questions, but I want to be able to age appropriately explain things like the Minneapolis shooting and things like that to my children. I don't want them intaking that information without being able to help them through that processing of that grief and that fear and all of that. It's just not I don't think they're ready for that 6th and 7th grade. I don't think they're honestly even ready for it in 8th grade, but I'm not going to win the argument forever.
What I just kind of note is that, I mean, this is obviously a topic of constant conversation, but that I'm noticing it creeps into even the pediatrician's office during kind of visits, as well as it's taking up time in school to kind of sort out these things that happen outside of school. I wonder, Leah, Kara, whether you have anything you'd like to kind of add or, to this.
I mean, this is a constant thing I'm talking to about yet with young people and with parents. Parents in terms of the struggle of what do I do, and young people many times was saying, I want it. And I start with, this is an individual family decision in terms of how you use technology, and young people need to sleep, and technology gets in the way of that. Also that digital understanding, it needs to be something that kids learn. And so how Amanda said, you keep the screen faced in a public place, the fact that many young people don't want to do that, but also to remind them that everything that they put out there is visible. That there is a disconnect between the reality of when they put things out there to what is actually what they see as private. But I think that making decisions about tech use that is based in your own values, that's usually the first thing I say with parents is, where are the non-negotiables for you with technology? And so that could be at a family dinner, that could be in the bedroom, for instance, or at nighttime. But you start with there. Where are your values about tech use? And then you as parents also need to model that. It's really hard and frustrating for young people when they're not able to use technology, but they're sitting in a room and their parents are just scrolling on their phones. And I say this I have done this before as a parent. So, but it's something that is confusing and hard, and that sort of really fight for justice and that kids want at this age. They're like, if you could do it, why can't I? And there's lots of reasons why it's different, but also modeling healthy use, especially I think of going back to what we're saying in the bedroom, it's not good for anyone. And that sometimes screens are useful when you are a single parent, when you have a lot of children. Like I also want to, there's, just to have some empathy that sometimes this is a way that people use to get by. And find time to have connection. So even if your kids are watching TV, they're, on the phones, to find time with connection outside of that. But I think that there's a lot of really great podcasts about this that have, a new one I listened to was by Good Inside. It was just a couple days ago. It was called A Different Take on Screen Time. I appreciated that one. But I think there's some really great podcasts to at least bring up the questions to ask within ourselves as parents, and also to ask our kids to have curiosity about what do you want, and what are these things meaningful to you, because they are really different than when we were. I mean, I feel so grateful I didn't have to deal with this when I was in school. I feel very grateful, but so I don't understand them, so I need to ask questions as well.
So Lee, I'm going to put you on the spot, which is, we understand, a worst case scenario. A parent calls you up and just told you that their 7th grade daughter sent a nude picture of herself to a boy, and now it's all over the place. What's a parent to do?
Well, you really go for a big one, don't you, Ted?
Well,
because there's layers to that one.
yeah, well, thanks for entertaining this. I know
Yeah,
it's a
I
tough
mean,
one.
I think that there are, there's levels of triage that you need to do about what gets out there. But I also think there's that, so much of the impulse to do that is a conversation around relationships. It's a conversation about sex and sexuality. It's conversations around, what do you think happens? Like, what did you notice happening? This is also a good example of, you want to give 24 hours before you have that conversation, because this child is mortified. The parent is going to be very upset and hot, and trying to say, I want to support you in this. This is really embarrassing, I imagine. What can we do together right now? And there are ways that schools can support this. I think schools get very tired of their own sort of trying to navigate all of school stuff, but there are ways that they help, as much damper as much as they can. But I think using it as an opportunity to say, look at the chain of what happens, and how expansive things get when you put it out there.
Would anybody like to help out, Leah, with this
Yeah,
one?
please help me out on that one too. Anyone?
I was just going to walk back a little bit from this cliff to just normalize that some people may already have, their kids may have cell phones. You may have a 6th grader with a cell phone, a smartwatch. You may be a divorced couple, and there's lots of reasons why people give their kids phones. And so it can feel overwhelming to hear how bad they are. And so I think everything in parenting is like, we just learn better, we do better. We learn more, we do more. It's okay to have set a rule and go back on it and say, oh, I didn't realize that you had all this access, or I know I used to let you use it in your bedroom, but I've just learned this new information, and we're going to change. I've made this decision. I want to talk to you about it, and let them have their feelings, and boundaries can change. Like, for example, bedtime in our house, like, is a lot about how much children need to sleep for their brain development. So I always just go back to that. This isn't about me. This is about healthy. My job is to create healthy norms for your parenting, and you need this much sleep, and your bus comes at this time, and like, to not have a hectic morning. And then we problem solve together and like allow that kind of hard feelings to happen. So like, it's a lot in addiction prevention. We talk a lot about harm reduction, so like, how can you reduce harm? Like Leah was saying, it's a lot of like, where are your non-negotiables? Where are you feeling like you're unhappy with what's happening? And then get some skills and strategies around certain things to improve. I did on that handout that I sent on the bottom were some internet and social media parenting resources on, I don't like to call them dumb phones because it's an ableist word. So I use the term stupid phones on there that don't have access to the internet. And there's some other resource guides there.
I mean, you can use screens to your benefit too, that it's not just as a time killer, you know, having something that your kids are interested in and want to watch together as a family and utilizing that screen time as like a family interactive thing to do together where you're like, hold on, baby, I'm on the phone. Speaking of, where you are watching a movie together and then whatever themes are coming up, you're kind of discussing that together. Or if like a hard thing happens, you can ask them what they thought about it or what they would have done in that situation. And it might open the conversation a little bit better. Buddy, hang on. But that I think has to also be sort of scripted where we're kind of like know what we're getting into and watching things that are age appropriate. What did we watch the other day, kiddo? K-pop Demon Hunters. That's the new thing, right? So watching that with them and going through some of that, and he's here. But letting them know like what things are like they're learning from that relationship or what things they could, you know, pick up from seeing how people treat each other and stuff like that. But and then to go back to that other situation that we were talking about with the photo on the internet, I think that's an important conversation, honestly, to have with kids right now because it is happening. And we've had kids that have put themselves at risk for self-harm over things like that. And so starting a conversation with your kids before that happens, I think is the best proactive thing you can do. And if you find yourself into the situation where it did already happen, maybe addressing like the feelings or the needs that led up to that moment, where the moment isn't the thing that you concentrate on, but concentrating more on, did we do that because we were seeking approval? Did we do that because we were seeking connection? Like what caused that in the first place to be the reactionary thing that happened? And then like working backwards from there. But that can be really difficult when so much is on the line, you know, and you can't like take that back. And so I have had many conversations in the clinic proactively, literally telling kids, do not send pictures of body parts that are covered by bathing suits to anyone on the internet or the phone. Like those are yours and you're allowed to do with them what you like, but keep them off the internet. And you know, like if someone asks you for something like that, that would be a time to immediately tell a grown-up that you trust so you guys can work through that and make a decision about why that's happening and how we can get ourselves out of that situation. That is a really tough one and it happens all the time.
All right, well, it's almost 7 o'clock, and unless there are any last minute kind of questions, I think I'm sure we all have kind of busy things to attend. So I'd like to, one, to kind of just thank everybody in the audience for carving out the time for us to have this conversation and for us to kind of really work on trying to kind of, you know, be a little village. And, you know, we're all in this together and not be so isolated in this discussion. And I'd like to kind of thank our panelists for carving out the time in their busy schedules as well. So thank you very much. And I think, you know, Jim, we can stop the record and